Hey guys, after the release of my last video and a lot of messages from people I know in year 12 in VCE, I've realized that mental health is a really big thing this year with you guys. I know with last year I just had a really long, like 2 really long lockdowns. For you guys it's been really consistent, plus VCA has been very quiet. I don't think I've heard anything from them at all. So I understand it's really tough. Please comment below. You guys can help each other out, right? This is a community. You can help each other out, message each other. Plus you can message me as well. I'll be replying to all the comments, but if you want something more private, you can message me on Instagram as well. Mental health is very important. Stress is probably overwhelming for you guys, even if you're not in VCE. So please take time, see your friends on Zoom, not see your friends in person, but watch like a movie together, play some games together, anything that helps you relax. I think studies is honestly, secondary to your mental well-being and just being happy in general. So with that being said, let's hop into today's video. The comparative essay for me was definitely one of the hardest parts of English. Last video I made one breaking down an essay that I did, so please go check that out. And today we'll be going through my thinking when I see a topic and my planning process. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Darren, a first year medical student studying at Monash University here in Melbourne, Australia. For those of you who are new, I graduated last year with an ATAR of 99.95 and in particular a 50 in English. Now I put up a poll on my Instagram and on YouTube asking you guys for topics you'd like me to cover, and a lot of you wanted to know how to write the comparative in more depth. And also I saw on the analytics that my last comparative video was spiking up in views, which I think is probably because you guys have your SAC for that soon. So the structure of today's video is I'll be going through the themes of my 2 texts, so Ransom, the novel, and The Queen, which was a film, and talking about what I would write for each of the 3 body paragraphs and my general contention for those themes. Now, even if you aren't doing these texts, I think there are certain things you can take away, such as the fact that my general structure is pretty similar for all the themes, and also my ideas are really similar as well. Like the author's contention and the director's contention remains the same. You just really got to adapt it to each individual theme. And of course, if you are studying the same text as me, then this is probably a goldmine for you. Enjoy. Alright, so on your screen right now are the main themes of both The Queen and Ransom. So just to go through them, we have grief, loss, challenges of leadership, change, and tradition and storytelling. Already you can see some of them are quite similar. So we'll go through them one by one and I'll tell you exactly what I'm thinking. So in general, my structure for these was quite chronological. Like I sort of tracked the characters' progression, and that also is how I build up my paragraphs. So let's write down BP1, BP2, BP3. So BP1, grief and loss. Firstly, I like to set the scene a bit. So my first paragraph, and I always encourage you guys to be able to do this, is to be able to state the contention of your paragraph in a very straightforward way. So for my first body paragraph, it's simply that grief is difficult to overcome. Grief. My topic sentence will be a little bit more fancy than that, and you can check out my last video for specifically how I would phrase it. But essentially, it's this: grief is difficult to overcome. And I think with comparative, you can't really have really complex ideas that you want to develop within a particular body paragraph. Now, the reason for this is that you need to compare 2 texts, and you don't have much time. You have the same amount of time with this part as with your other sections of English as well, which is why you want a really simple idea to focus around, and then explore the nuances and the comparisons between the 2 texts with that simple idea as the foundation. So grief is difficult to overcome. Secondly, I would say, we've set the scene, it's difficult to overcome. How do we overcome it? I would say that grief can be overcome in 2 ways, and you sort of pick one. It sort of depended on how I felt on the day. So grief can be overcome by So 1, I have either human connecting with others. Let me just shift this. I think it's all right. And 2 is connecting with yourself, or connecting with nature. I used. And in this is also giving yourself, connecting with nature is a good one. Or yourself. Alright, and I don't think it's too hard to guess what's next. So we've set the scene. Grief is difficult. This is how you overcome it. And then the final body paragraph is the benefits of overcoming grief. So through overcoming grief, you achieve many benefits. And actually, overcoming might not be the best word for grief. Something like successfully navigating grief might be better. So through successfully navigating grief, you can unlock a wealth of benefits. Right. So those would be my 3 body paragraph ideas, and I will come back with some specific moments for each body paragraph that you can use, but I will go through the broad ideas for each of the topics first, so you can sort of see how the topics are actually quite similar. Once again, we will do our BP1, BP2, and BP3. So, with challenges of leadership, firstly, it's sort of the same structure. So you'll see that my first paragraph is still that the challenges of leadership are difficult to overcome, but the reasons are pretty similar as well. But you see how I don't frame it as grief, because obviously it's not a grief theme. So you sort of just rephrase it. The challenges of leadership are difficult to overcome. Oops. Secondly, we've had set the scene. Next would be how do we overcome it? And I would suggest that overcoming it is through the leadership of others. You need other people to guide you to successfully overcome these challenges. Sometimes leaders require the guidance of others. And you see how this is quite similar to this second BP here, but I would argue that nature is not so big of a deal in leadership. So still need to be flexible. And BB3, through navigating leadership, you can achieve a better connection with the people you lead, or through overcoming leadership, you just get a bunch of benefits, which you can go into in more specificity in the paragraph. So. You could say closure. Alright, next, change. And once again, you see it's very similar. So, BP1, BP2, BP3. And I won't write the whole thing out now, because I think you guys are sort of getting an idea. So, once again, change is difficult. So, change is difficult. And this is due to our entrenched habits. Part 2, change can be navigated by others, by connecting with others, listening to others, and also by sometimes you can argue by connecting with nature as well. And thirdly, you get benefits. Tradition is pretty similar once again. The bonds of tradition are hard for us to break. So, hard to deviate from tradition. How do we break from tradition? We need to listen to others. We need to follow the guidance of others. BP3 would be something like, you get benefits. You become more flexible, you're able to adapt more to each scenario. Finally, for storytelling. And for storytelling, once again, it's kind of similar. It's hard to create your own story, or the first step to creating your own story is to break out of what's held back in the past. So it's kind of similar to tradition. To create your own story, you can't just be one person in a long line of people who've done the same thing. You really have to step out and do something special. But to successfully tell a story, you also need other people to help you. Once again, with this third body paragraph, it would be something about, through creating your own story, you're able to bring closure, you're able to connect better with the people around you and also with yourself. So benefits others versus self. There is another topic that I just thought of actually, which is a bit harder, and that is power. All right. And let's do the BPs for this. Okay, I need to have a think. Cut that. How would I argue about power? Power would be... All right, so this structure will deviate a little bit. What I think it's suggesting, if you watch the film, read the novel, initially is that power is restrictive, especially overwhelming power, like if you're a king or if you're a queen. Power is restrictive. Secondly, it is that you sometimes need to relent a bit of your power. Like, it's to get out of the restriction of your power. The way to do it isn't to just try and enforce more and try to impose your will on others even more. It's to sort of take a step back and just let others do things for you sometimes and to follow the guidance of others. And thirdly, similar, benefits. All right, let's go into this in more detail. It might seem like everything is really similar right now, but we'll go through it a bit more in terms of what moments I'd use, and hopefully that will clarify how you can really adjust it to each essay topic. All right, so what I would say is that for different topics in general, you do have to shift your language a bit. For example, for the leadership topic here, you would basically just use the word leaders a lot. The king, the queen, the leader, Achilles. Whereas for a topic like change, even though it's kind of similar, so one challenge of leadership is breaking from the past, and change is all about breaking from the past. In change, you would avoid using words like leader. So don't use leader. And the reason for this is because you want to make them as different as possible. If in change, all you're talking about is just leader this, leader that, king, queen, then it really makes it seem like you're answering a different topic altogether. The focus of your topic sentence in particular for each of these paragraphs should be on change, whereas the topic sentences for all of these paragraphs should all mention leadership. As you can see here, we have leadership, leaders, leaders. Whereas here, we would not have that. We'd have change is difficult. The way to successfully navigate change or to successfully create change is to engage with others. Through changing for the better, we can achieve benefits for not just ourselves, but others as well. So the topic sentence is very important in framing your ideas and making sure they are not the same for every kind of essay. With specific moments, and this is probably especially helpful if you're doing the same text. So grief is difficult to overcome. Now, the reason for this, I think, is that it's because of your past habits. Especially, I think your past habits prevent you from overcoming grief. And you can see this with Achilles. how he, tears down Hector's body. He's a warrior, right? That's all he's ever known. All he's known is just killing people, destroying them. And so when he's confronted with immense grief, that's all he can do as well. But obviously we see in the novel that it's not helpful. We could talk about, who else could we talk about? We can talk about Charles being really upset. So in the initial moments of the film, the Queen, you can hear him screaming. And the Queen as well. For the Queen, it's less so her own, whoops, I just spelled that completely wrong. It's less so her own grief, but more so the grief of the people around her. Because it's not very clear whether she feels intense grief for Diana's death or not. It's more so she has the grief of Charles, the grief of her children, and also the grief of the people of England. And she doesn't really know how to deal with that. So you can see her sort of almost frigid response, her awkward response to Charles's grief. All she says is like, oh, what's Diana doing in Paris when they announce her death, which is not a very normal reaction. And secondly, another instance is also with the grandchildren. So Charles is talking to her grandchildren in the room, and all the Queen can do is look through a keyhole. Because of her past habits of being very distanced, she is unable to interact with the grief of her grandchildren. And you see how I'd say interact with the grief of her grandchildren? I have to shove in grief there because that's what the theme is about. Whereas if I was using that moment for saying, tradition stops us from connecting with others, then I would say her looking through a keyhole represents her not being able to connect with her children rather than interact with their grief. Okay, grief can be overcome by connecting with others. So I have separate moments for both, connecting with others or connecting with nature. So connecting with nature, I usually like using a descriptive passage about the Queen at Balmoral. It's just where she's at the moors, where her car or truck, whatever, breaks down and she's standing there and she's crying. It's this very natural scenery that gives her time to grieve. It's the only time she's alone, away from the walls of Balmoral, away from Tony Blair's phone calls, away from Janver and all those guys, and she can just sit there and just cry and just feel stressed as a person. So can properly come to terms with the grief of others. And I think the stag in particular is a good example. It gives her something to grieve over. She's genuinely quite sad and feels pity at the stag dying. And for connecting with nature, obviously with Ransom, you have the classic example of Priam and all the griddle cakes and the water. All right. As with connecting with others, the Queen and the Blair is a good one. Blair often empathizes with the Queen, and so that helps her deal with the grief of others. He sort of tells her what to do. So you can see when Blair says 1, lower the flag of Balmoral, 2, it's that very authoritative phone call. It's sort of grief can be overcome if you listen to others. So the Queen can only properly manage the grief of others when Blair sort of tells her, this is how you do it. And for Priam, it's sort of sharing in their grief. Priam plus Achilles. They sort of share in their role as fathers, as men, and that allows them both to properly grieve. Priam, not so much. More so the focal point will be Achilles, because Priam, it's debatable whether he's that sad about his son dying. It's more so Achilles and Hector's death. Achilles seeing Priam, seeing his dad in Priam for some reason, that lets him sort of let go of that anger and feel a perfect amity. And another instance of connecting with others is also where the Queen grieves with the people. So through her just saying as a grandmother in her speech, she sort of gives a conduit. She alleviates and brings catharsis to the people. The English people, for so long, this woman that they've all loved, Diana, she's died, and the one person that represents their country, the Queen, refuses to truly acknowledge her death. But when she finally does, and when she grieves along with them as a grandmother, that's when they feel like, ooh, like all that pressure, pent up pressure, all that sadness, anger, disappointment, all those emotions can finally be released. So it's empathizing with others in this connecting with others part that allows us all to deal with grief. Now, I think the importance here is that it's like you sort of touch on this in body paragraph 3, but it brings benefits to everyone and not just yourself. Unlock a wealth of benefits. So while in body paragraph 2, I'd focus on the interactions between those people, in body paragraph 3, it's more so the benefits, so the aftermath. So the classic one for the Queen, I'll just talk about the her speech and also the peaceful music. It's called Verdi's Requiem, by the way. I actually wrote that a couple times in my essays. I think it's quite a cool name. Over Diana's funeral. And you see the camera pan to different people's faces, and you really just feel that, okay, this very tumultuous time has come to an end. And of course, you can also go with Blair and the Queen as well. It's just really peaceful scene. So it's anything that illustrates peacefulness and catharsis. And finally, for the, for Ransom, you would have either sort of Somax plus Priam, or Priam plus Achilles. So these two guys, you have them walking back, and it's just a really peaceful scenery. I think there's still a bit of frost on the ground, and it's either early, I think it's early morning, and it's just a really pretty description by Maloof. Whereas Priam and Achilles, I think where they're breaking bread, anytime where they're together, you sort of get a really big sense of peacefulness, and that these two guys who should be at each other's necks, who should be absolutely like the leaders of opposing sides who have fought for a really, really long time, but here in this moment, they're peaceful. And why are they peaceful? Because they've navigated their own grief. Because rather than absolutely slashing at Hector's body, Achilles has learnt to give it back to Hector's father. And with Priam, he's more of a personal journey. With Achilles, it's more grief, and by overcoming that, he feels, this perfect amity. He feels that the clogging web inside him has been cleared. All right, so I hope that's helped. And we'll move on to challenges of leadership. So I will probably write it a bit quicker now, considering that all the ideas are pretty repetitive. Challenges of leadership are difficult to overcome. These are sort of linked to tradition, which is also linked to this topic because of the past, right? For Achilles, you see it manifested in the way he attacks. One more thing with grief. Another good idea for body paragraph 1 is isolation. So grief is difficult to overcome because people isolate themselves. And you can use Achilles, the way he isolates himself from his men. They don't even recognize who he is anymore. He tries to find faults within them. And also the Queen as well. She just sort of runs off to Balmoral with Philip and all those guys. And by ignoring that, that's not good either. Sort of similar with here. So the challenges of leadership are difficult to overcome. And you kind of see this in the way that Priam has a lack of self. In the initial descriptions, you see that he can't really sneeze, he can't really cough. He feels like he is the country. He feels really empty. He feels like a pea shaking around in a pod. Like he's not his own person. He's just the king, he's a figurehead, and he doesn't have a real personality. So you can see how difficult leadership is because it strips you of your not humanity, but of your individuality. And for the Queen, I used the scene where she's sort of sitting there at the start and they're painting her portrait. And it just looks like she's part of the room. Looks like she's part of all the regalia and she's just one new queen in a long line of queens. Queen, so portrait. So, sneezing. Coughing. Don't quote sneezing, coughing. I'm pretty sure it's sneeze and cough. So you have to use the square brackets. Body paragraph 2. Sometimes leaders require the guidance of others. So Somax guiding Priam, sort of urging him along, telling him to relax, giving him the griddle cakes is really important. And also Blair and plus the Queen. You see the way that Blair continually persists with the Queen, never really gives up on her, keeps calling her, and also orders her what to do at the end, gives her clear instructions on how to improve the situation. One other thing here, grief can be overcome by connection with others. I forgot. Priam plus Somax is an awesome one you can use. Sort of Priam seeing Somax being sad, seeing Somax, how close he is with his son, with his daughter, all the stories he tells, it makes Priam feel sort of sad at his own lack of past history, because he never valued his sons in that way. And only through that does he, leave a tear, and he is able to sort of know how to deal with grief. And for Somax too, he wants to punch Beauty when Beauty kills his son, but he doesn't. He hugs her. And you see that they both cry, and that is the way to properly overcome grief. So you can either use Beauty, or you can use sort of Somax's stories and Priam crying. It's a bit messy, but hopefully my narration can help you guys. Leaders require the guidance of others. Good. Somax guide Priam, Blair plus the Queen. So you see, while the main themes are the same, the moments are slightly different. Like, I wouldn't use these moments for grief because they're not really grief. And similarly, these moments are much more appropriate for leadership than some of these moments here, where like the Queen unable to respond to her grandchildren's grief. That's not really leadership here. All right, body paragraph 3, after navigating the challenges. Closure is pretty classic. It's just all the moments I've mentioned before. So Achilles plus Priam, so eating, Queen's speech. Or like Priam plus Somax, P plus S, walking. All right, change is difficult because of how we've acted in the past. So this is pretty similar to the leadership one. More so than the grief one for me, because I feel like the Queen, no, it's pretty similar to the first one. Yeah, it's more similar to grief than with leadership. So with change is difficult. Why is it difficult? Because of our past habits, because of the security that our past habits brings. And for Achilles, that's being a warrior, right? He just destroys people. That's his job. Ever since he was a kid, that's what he's trained in. Like, he was dipped in the river and he's basically invincible. So it's like a war machine. So Achilles, so that's why he keeps bashing up Hector even when he's dead, because that's all he knows. He's never learned to, especially after his mom left, and you can probably quote something about her soft influence leaving him. Especially after she left, all he knows is to bash up people. He's sad, bash up people, but that doesn't solve the problem. And the Queen, she's unable to get close to people, because that's how she leads, right? She's meant to be impersonal, at a distance from other people, and so she is unable to connect with people like her grandchildren, and also with Charles as well. So you see in the car ride, if you remember, Charles is saying, oh, what a great mother Diana was, and the Queen's like, okay, I'm just going to walk the dogs, and she just leaves, because she can't connect with him properly. Though I would argue the grandchildren one is a bit better, because the Queen actually wants to connect with her grandchildren in that scenario, whereas with Charles, she voluntarily just leaves. Change, connecting with others, you need other people to fully change. If you remember, Priam is still sitting really rigidly in the horse. It's sort of Somax showing him all the little things of life, all the outdoors, that helps Priam really loosen up. So this is the others one, and two is Priam. No, whoops. Would be Blair and the Queen. Whereas with nature, the classic nature one, so the moors, or just the water and the fish. Were there fish? I think there were fish in Ransom. Benefits, just the classic speech, P plus S or P plus A. So I'd focus on slightly different parts here. So with this here, you see how I use it for other aspects as well. For example, grief, the nature one in grief. But for the nature one in grief, I'd say, her being alone gives her the proper chance to deal with the grief of others, to fully understand the grief of others, and to, cry herself. Whereas for change, I would say everything's been moving so fast, it's only being alone that lets all that sort of slow down for her, lets her take all that in. And it's similar. I get how those two are similar, but I'd focus on change in this one and grief in the other one. You just have to be very good with your language. Tradition, I'm not going to rewrite this. It's pretty much the same as change. Yeah, it's pretty much the same as change. So I'm not going to write this one. Storytelling is a bit different. Break from the past. Actually, no, this is pretty similar as well. So you can see how all the ideas are very similar. You just have to phrase it differently. To break from the past, you'd say sort of Priam plus the Queen. That's how you make your own story. Priam, key difference between these two is that Priam is able to break because of the power that he has, and also he inherently wants to break from the past. And you can say that's because of Iris. You can say that's because of his own past with Hercules or Heracles, how they spell it in the book, I think. Whereas the Queen is unable to really make her own story until Blair really pushes her. And the Queen, you can have a counterexample. She's someone who is unable to break from the past, even in the face of unprecedented events, for a majority of the film. And honestly, another alternative you could do is that it's just difficult. So it's difficult to craft your own story because it's already been written so many times. It's so much easier just living out someone else's story, or living out the story that other people have continued to portray about you. And with this, you can use things like Achilles, the Queen, all the classic ones. You need other people to help to craft your own story. You need people like Somax to really push you, because Priam is still a king, still acting very rigidly on that horse. It's Somax that pushes him further. And for the Queen, she doesn't know how to break from tradition. She hasn't been taught that. Ever since she was a girl, she's been taught how to be a good queen, how to not break from tradition. So she needs Blair to help. And Blair to help the Queen. And also, in a way, Priam helps Achilles craft his own story. Priam helps Achilles break out this story of this brute, this animal, this jackal. He helps him become this warrior who is able to empathize with others and is able to give this body back to Priam. Now remember that Hector killed Achilles' brother, Patroclus, and he is still able to give this back. That's not what a normal warrior does. But by doing this, by Priam helping Achilles do this, Achilles is able to craft his story as something above a warrior. He's both a warrior and a human and a father. And benefits crafting your own story. I'd probably focus more on the end of the book for this one. So rather than just that mere P plus S, P plus A, their peacefulness, but also just actually no, I'd mention that in the conclusion. So you'd still use these classic ones. But for the conclusion here, I would especially focus on beauty. So in Ransom, the curious thing is that through all this, massive change between Priam and Achilles, this very monumental moment, Priam is killed, Achilles dies, and so what do we remember? And no one believes Somax. All we remember is beauty. And I think that represents the value of the ordinary. And storytelling isn't undervalued, isn't sabotaged. The value of storytelling isn't sabotaged just because no one believes you. It's the little ordinary things that are passed down that are important in stories. And it's important just because it happened and it existed. It doesn't have to be remembered for generations to come. Alright, power is restrictive. You got the classic, when do you guys think? You can have a think along with me. I've gone through it already. So the first example would be Priam not being like a true person, not being his own person. The Queen can't connect with others. Relent power is when Priam sort of lets Somax take control. Listens to Somax. And you see how like Priam in his courtroom, in his council room, is very, very firm, really angry, and he has absolute control there. But you see in nature, he's almost like a little kid. It's Somax who leads him along. It's Priam also who allows himself to be led along. He doesn't act like a king. He's like, all right, I want to learn how to be a person, so I will listen to this guy who's like a layman, and he just has his donkey, and he's not like a very important figure or a very strong figure, but he's someone who Priam allows to lead him. And for the Queen, listening to Blair is just the classic one. And the benefits of relenting your power can be seen in just the classic ones. Priam plus Achilles and the speech plus the subsequent like funeral. Alright, and just with the conclusion, what I normally talk about is the fact that both Achilles and Priam died, and also the fact that I'd also talk about the scene where the camera pans out on Blair and the Queen walking in the gardens. I do discuss that in my previous video, so please go give that a watch. And in terms of what I'd say, I did use that conclusion for a lot of my pieces. So I hope this has helped you guys out in terms of seeing that, the ideas are very similar. The moments you choose would be slightly different for each topic, and the parts of the moments that you focus on would also be different. What I recommend is not to like memorize this, but to understand why it's different. Like for example, the fact that Achilles, choosing to isolate himself is not really tradition, right? Because it's not proven that as a warrior, the tradition is to isolate yourself. Whereas Achilles tearing down Hector's body can be seen as a tradition of him as a warrior, because that's kind of what warriors do. So understanding why you have certain moments with certain themes will help you remember these. For intros and conclusions, my past video will hopefully clear that up. If you guys have any questions about these moments, about these texts, or just about general comparative preparation and structure, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really liked breaking down these texts again, something I haven't done. I've been tutoring it, but something I haven't done in depth since my exams. With regards to general prep, I do recommend planning. It's extremely important, especially when it gets close to your SAC. Hopefully your knowledge of the text is quite sound, and so you can just really sit down and do exactly what I did. Plan out your topic sentences first, and then go through your moments and sort of why you choose those moments. Maybe a couple quotes if you want to go even more in depth. Good luck for your comparative SACs. Leave any questions you have anywhere. You can DM me on Instagram. You can leave them in the comments below. You can email me, and I'll get to them. And I look forward to seeing you all next time.